Having personally obtained multiple second citizenships, having helped hundreds of people do the same, and having heard from tens of thousands of you over the years who are in our audience who have either gotten a second passport or had some troubles along the way. Today, I'm going to share with you 11 mistakes that I see people making when choosing and getting their second passport. I'm going to tell you what the mistakes are. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. Here at Nomad Capitalist, we've not only built up a team of about 30 people, but we've built a global network of people who can help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs legally go where they're treated best, from second passports to lower taxes. And today, I'm going to share with you some mistakes that I see people making, perhaps some mistakes that I have made when I was less educated about this stuff as a consumer as well as an information provider about second citizenship. I keep doing this stuff because I keep learning new things every day that I think you don't learn when you are just in the business and not on the consumer side. And so the first mistake that I want to talk about is the stereotyping. Coming from the United States, coming from the Western world, and working with a lot of folks from that world, there are certainly some stereotypes. Now, I would say not to entirely push back against your stereotypes. I know that I talk to a lot of folks and I'll say, hey, what do you think about Turkey as a program? And I often hear a lot of unease. Some people love the idea of the Turkish citizenship program. It's not a bad deal, but a lot of people just feel an unease. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you go and get a passport when it just feels wrong in your soul, because you're not going to fight that, right? I mean, logic is not going to fight the emotion. That's one thing I've learned. But I would not play the stereotyping game where you look at other countries as being insignificant. I've talked, and I actually made a whole video about why I would accept a passport from Nicaragua. And I have people that I've met along my travels who are from Nicaragua. They don't want their own passport, but yet if you look at it without the emotions, without either the condescension from a Western point of view or without people from Nicaragua thinking that they've got this bad passport, you've got a pretty darn good travel document. You can go to a lot of places. It's one of the better passports in the world. And so I would judge a passport based on its merits. I would try and take at least the emotion, at least the stereotype out of it. I wouldn't take away the emotion from yourself. Like if you just, if you dated a girl from Nicaragua and you're just going to feel terrible holding that passport kind of thing, then I wouldn't do that, much like the Turkey example. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it, but don't play into the stereotypes. The second mistake people often make when they're getting their second passport is thinking that they have to have a country that they're going to love living in or that they're going to love being a citizen of that country. Now, again, I understand it. I understand there's an emotional aspect to this. You can't look at any kind of tax planning, citizenship planning as entirely strategic. We are emotional beings. But I like to look at this as a cruise ship where, does Royal Caribbean have a great affinity for Panama or Liberia or wherever it is that their cruise ships are flagged? No, that was the best option for them to go where they're treated best. And I think at least for your second passport, when you're looking to protect yourself as a plan B, when you're looking to have economic protection from things like higher taxes, you want to get the passport that's in the timeline that you want and that offers the benefits that you want. And so, a lot of times that's a Caribbean citizenship by investment. People don't necessarily have a great emotional affinity for Grenada, for example. But if Grenada solves your problems, I would use that flag of convenience. And if you don't want to live in Grenada, well, then you can use your Grenada passport to go out and obtain a residence permit in a country where you do want to live. I often think that being a citizen of a country that you love living in on a long-term basis may not make sense. Residents, tourists often get treated better than citizens, particularly in some parts of the world, like Asia. It may be better to be a resident than to be a citizen. And so you can pair a country's citizenship that maybe you don't have a great love for and then go and live in a country where you really want to be. Now, if you're going to build your passport portfolio, you can certainly work up towards having some passports that you feel nice about. I've done that myself, but I think that it's important to make sure that you're not entirely putting this idea of love above getting the job done. Speaking of taxes, mistake number 3 is getting confused about how tax systems work. Now, while I believe this is changing, up until now, the United States is essentially the only country in the world where they tax their citizens on a full basis, no matter where they live in the world. You've got to file, and while there are exemptions, exclusions, offshore strategies you can use, you have to pay. It may be a heck of a lot less than you would pay living in the U.S., but you still have to be liable to pay taxes in the U.S. And we're seeing countries like China and South Africa now kind of talk about doing that. But most other countries, if you don't live in that country, you're not going to pay tax. However, that does not mean that the country does not have taxes. I see so many people in the citizenship by investment and the residence by investment world talking about golden visas and say, oh, it's a tax-free passport. You know, Dominica, for example, St. Lucia, which passport that I've done, these are not tax-free countries. They have taxes. What the people are referring to is if you don't live there, because most people don't move to Dominica once they become a citizen, then that country will not apply any kind of extraterritorial taxation on you the way that, let's say, the United States does. But since Americans are a small fraction of the consumers of that type of passport opportunity, it's a little disingenuous because if you leave Egypt, they're going to stop taxing you. If you leave Russia, they're going to stop taxing you. If you leave whatever country you're from, other than the U.S., and again, with some exceptions, Colombians going to Panama or French going to Monaco, what have you, but by and large, you're going to be taxed where you live. And so it's a little disingenuous to say that Dominica, for example, is a tax-free country. There are some citizenship programs that are in tax-free countries, Vanuatu, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, for example. But you want to make sure that you're getting your tax systems straight and not let someone convince you that a country is something that it's not. Now, the fourth mistake that people make is they look entirely at visa-free travel. This is another thing that's marketed, I think, by the citizenship industry. Well, they'll say, you can go to 157 countries with this passport. And I was talking to someone recently, we were debating the merits between two different passports, and he came and he said, this one has 155 countries and this one has 152 countries. We literally couldn't figure out what the three other countries were. Now, I eventually ran a report and we figured it out. These countries you wouldn't even care about. And so what you've got with some of the Caribbean citizenship by investment programs where they market this visa-free travel and the agents market the idea of how many countries you can go to. Because again, the end consumer is somebody who's in China, who's in Pakistan, who's in Iraq, who's potentially in Russia and doesn't realize perhaps their passport's gotten better over the years, is selling you this number as if you're buying this great travel freedom. And so these countries have gone out and they've signed deals at the UN, where they'll say, oh, let's have mutual visa-free travel to Togo, for example. Well, if you aren't going to Togo, who cares, right? I mean, that's probably not adding anything to anybody's life. And so the challenge is if you're getting most second passports that are by investment, for example, or paper residences where you have a residence permit and you naturalize without having to change your lifestyle much, then chances are that you're not going to have visa-free travel to the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the CUNA countries, as I call them. So you are probably going to give up those unless you have a passport through your ancestry in Europe or unless you're going to go through a golden visa program like that in Portugal. But nevertheless, I think especially for your second passport, and especially if you plan to keep your current citizenship, visa-free travel is not all that important because you can always go out and get visas to most countries. Yes, the U.S. and Canada, maybe Australia are a little bit difficult. Getting a visa to go to Morocco or to Thailand or to wherever else is not difficult. And so I think that visa-free travel is often overplayed and people mistake that for, I get 3 extra countries, let me pay extra. Maybe there's someone, certainly if you're looking at Caribbean programs where you want to do one program over another because it gives you access to Russia. And so if you're doing business in that part of the world, sure, that's worth it. Or if you're doing business in China, again, not a very difficult visa to get, but maybe it's worth paying a little bit extra for Grenada, for example. But don't focus entirely on that visa-free travel map because you're going to be just fine for the most part when traveling. The fifth mistake that I see a lot of Westerners making, and really a lot of people in general, is focusing exclusively on Tier A passports. Now, a Tier A passport, in my definition, is one where you're part of the U.S. visa waiver program or you're Canada, right? So you've got 40 or 42 countries that have that out of more than 200 different passports that are issued out there. So it's a small group. And these are obviously highly desirable passports because usually if you can go to the U.S., you can go to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the ones that I mentioned. And so what I suggest that if you're from a Western country you do is look at a Tier B passport or even potentially in some cases a Tier C passport, which would be, visa-free access to Europe or even not access to Europe. And the reason is this. You want to have, if you're building a passport portfolio, some kind of complementary passport. I've worked with a couple people over the years where they've been U.S., Canadian, and U.K. citizens, or U.S., Canadian, Australian, and U.K. citizens, or I think one was New Zealand, Canadian, and Irish, or something like that. These passports, wow, that's great, but you're not really adding any kind of diversification. Sure, the U.S. taxes you on your worldwide income when those other countries don't. I happen to think some of them might start to in the future, like Canada. Someone there has talked about it. But you want to have some complementary aspect to your passport portfolio. Have one that's a little bit more Eastern friendly. Have one that has that visa-free access to Russia. Have one that is not part of the Five Eyes and that people kind of, potentially you can get into some trouble with it, or people won't want you to be there, or your country can get into a spat, right? And so if I'm a U.S. citizen or I'm a British citizen, and people think that my country is going out and starting wars around the world or doing whatever, or people look at the U.S. and they say, hey, they've got all the coronavirus cases. Well, I'd like to be from a country that's an island or some tiny country that nobody thinks about, nobody's got a problem with, something that's under the radar, something that people aren't offended by, right? And so for the same reasons, if I'm American and I go out because I'm Jewish, and I'm not Jewish, but if I am Jewish and you go out and get an Israeli passport, are you really helping yourself in terms of the reputation in some places? Nothing against getting an Israeli passport, but I'm saying I would always look at how do I have a complementary passport portfolio where I'm covering a couple of different bases. And I think the mistake is trying to just get basically the exact same passport that you have. Certainly if you're an American or Canadian, you want to get a European Union citizenship to have access to that block, fine. Certainly if you're an American looking to give up your citizenship, maybe you get a smaller passport now and you get a residence in a European country and work towards that citizenship to give you back the travel privileges that you have later after a couple of years. But I just think, focusing entirely on the best passports is often not a good idea. And I think a lot of people give up because the high price or the higher requirements for those top-tier passports are more cumbersome than those for passports that are almost as good. The sixth mistake that I see people making is they are not asking themselves why they're getting a second passport. They're not calculating the ROI. So let's just say that you're looking at a second citizenship for protection from higher taxes, for example. And you think that by having a second passport, you can protect yourself and ultimately save $100,000 a year in taxes. You can reinvest that money, turn it into $125,000. Well, if you've got a program where it takes 5 years of residence and then a year to get the citizenship, that's going to cost you $750,000 in extra cost by waiting those years, plus whatever the cost of the initial program was. Whereas if you went and got a passport in 6 months and spent $150,000 with all the fees, you'd be ahead of the game. But I think that people don't often understand why they're doing it. If it's a plan B, certainly you can ask yourself, what percentage of my assets, what percentage of my income is worth devoting towards this potential insurance policy? But I think being clear on why you want to do this and doing the math, what am I trying to accomplish on all fronts? And what is that worth to me? Look at it like you're an insurance company. Look at it actuarially. I think that's something that most people don't do because there's an emotion around, I don't want to waste $100,000. I'm smarter than that. I don't think you need to go overboard, but I think you do need to consider the why and the ROI. Another mistake, number 7, that actually was mentioned to me a couple months ago by someone is not considering the follow-through. This speaks to the longer-term passport programs where you need to spend 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever, working towards that passport. And again, we'll work with a lot of programs that I call paper residence, where unlike a traditional naturalization where you're going and living and paying taxes and learning the language in the country 6, 9, 10 months a year to become a citizen, a paper residence, maybe it's 1 day a year, 1 day every 6 months, a week a year, something like that. But what I had someone mention to me recently, I had a guy who had 3 kids. And he said, I'm not convinced that even for the 3 years for this opportunity that you're suggesting, that I'm going to be able to convince my wife and I'm going to be able to get the kids on a plane to go there once a year to spend 3 or 4 days renewing this residence permit. And he says, I'm thinking, what's that going to cost? And it already sounds frustrating. And let's just get the passport. I can do it now. I don't really have to go anywhere. And there's no right or wrong option. I wanted to walk him, as I do everyone, through all the different scenarios. But he made a very interesting point that if you have to go to your country, even if it's one day every 6 months, even if it's one day a year, are you going to follow through with that? And I think that a lot of people, we get excited about things, getting our second passport now. Are you going to be as excited 3 years from now when you've got to stop running your business and you've got to get in a plane and you've got to go to wherever? If you're not prepared to do the follow-through, if the expense is too much, and again, for larger families, these paper residences, they add up because, the costs are not as scalable as in, for example, a citizenship by investment program, where an extra dependent, in St. Kitts and Nevis might be $10,000 or $15,000 in one of those programs. The cost of flying 6 or 7 people to a residence country every 6 months is just going to multiply. It's each person needs their own airline seat. So understand that and understand yourself, I think, how much are you going to be willing to commit in the long term to doing this if you're not actually going to move to that country. To that point, number 8, I think, is not considering all offers. One thing I ask people who come to me is, what do you know about the different ways to get citizenship? We've got lots of videos on YouTube where we talk about many of the different ways to do that. I think we've covered it to death. But a lot of people will come and they'll say, hey, I read about citizenship by investment, or I read about a golden visa. And those programs are great. And I think if you are a high earner, high net worth individual, they certainly make your life easier. Again, if I'm trying to build my ideal passport portfolio, those may not be either part of the mix or the entire part of the mix. And so what I've learned over the years from personal experience as a consumer is, if you go to Panama, that guy's going to sell you on Panama. If you go to a company that's in the citizenship by investment business, they're going to sell you on that. And I did an example a number of months ago where I talked about someone where he came to me, and we realized only after we dug deeper that not only did we not only need 2 passports for his family, we only needed 1 to accomplish his goals, and we didn't need to do it by investment and spend $130,000. We could do it through his family tree, and we could go and get a passport that way. And so, we saved potentially up to $150,000, or at least we offered a path to do that. And so I think that if you're not considering all the options, we talk about a lot of different options here, and there's obviously options that I speak more intently about with people who are working with us here. But if you're not considering all the options, you might go out and spend $150,000 to get passports for 2 people when only 1 person needs it, and actually that 1 person can get it without the large investment. Some people just have to make the investment. Nothing wrong with that, but I think it's always nice checking the boxes off, because there are, literally whenever someone comes in, I start to scrub against literally dozens of programs, not 5 in the Caribbean, not 4 in Europe. Number 9 is following the herd. I think that, sometimes, not so much in the citizenship world, but just in the offshore world in general, people, they get a bug in their ear about, Estonia, that's the place to be. And then they go to Estonia thinking it's this tax-free country because it's been built up in a certain way with the e-residence, and it's easy to set up a company and this and that. And they think it fulfills their goals, but in reality, they're just following what other people have done. And what I know is my strategy probably doesn't work for you. It's not your strategy. Your friend's strategy probably isn't yours. Everyone has different needs. Well, it's my brother. Well, your brother may have different needs. And so your business partner may have different needs. And so don't follow the herd. Just because your friend did something that's not the one for you. Again, you may have an ancestral passport opportunity. Your business, if you have a different business than someone else that you're talking to, you may have an opportunity to work towards a passport by creating jobs or investing somewhere, or maybe there's things that you're already doing that qualify. Maybe you have more money in the bank and you can get a passport that way. So, don't follow the herd. I really don't like brand names developing against things. It's part of the reason why I try and avoid living in brand name places, and it's something that I would recommend that you avoid in your passport pursuits as well. The 10th mistake people make is considering passport programs that don't exist or confusing residence with citizenship. So I talked to a gentleman the other day who said, I heard that there was an offer out there for Thailand citizenship where you just have to put $50,000 in the bank. And I corrected him and explained, there's different opportunities in Thailand for the Thailand elite visa, the Thailand investors visa, and yes, in some cases it involves putting money in the bank or buying real estate, but you're not getting citizenship, you're getting residence, and you're probably never going to get citizenship, unlike perhaps a European or a South American country where you can work towards citizenship but not get it immediately in most cases. You're probably never going to be a Thai citizen, and quite frankly, for most of the people that I'm talking to, if you're a Westerner, you probably wouldn't want to be. You might very much want to live in and love Thailand. Nothing wrong with that. But as a resident of whatever country is your best citizenship. And so don't confuse residence with citizenship. Don't look at programs that don't exist. A lot of programs have changed over the years. They've gone away. Belize does not offer a citizenship by investment program anymore. Peru, there was an article in the New York Times, 1993, $25,000, long gone, right? And so you want to make sure you're talking about opportunities that do exist and make sure that you're actually getting a citizenship. The last mistake, number 11, are the offers that are too good to be true. Now, we've talked about things like fast-track naturalization. We've talked about how certain high-level investors and business people can get special citizenships. But if something is, $15,000 in an envelope, if something is nowhere to be found, then you definitely want to at least ask, what's the constitutional basis? What's the legal basis for this citizenship being granted? Certainly there are citizenship programs out there that are not widely discussed. This is one thing. We've built up an entire research program at Nomad Capitalist to discover these opportunities that aren't widely discussed. And I think that certainly once opportunities go, they become too big. Paraguay is an example. The party eventually is over. But that said, if it sounds too good to be true, you definitely want to understand the legal basis of what the offer is. Don't get sucked into some kind of scam. Don't put money in an envelope. Don't do anything sneaky or shady. So those are 11 mistakes that I see people make. I'd like to hear a comment. If you've been through the process, if you've thought about going through the process, have you heard of any of these mistakes? Have you fallen for some of these mistakes? I think none of us is perfect, and we've all made some of these mistakes perhaps. Which of these mistakes stands out, or is there one that I'm missing? Leave a comment below. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.